Bullies messed with a disabled female veteran in a wheelchair, unaware she is a professional killer. The faint flicker of the neon Crossroads Diner sign seemed to sputter in rhythm with the tension now permeating the room. Inside, the 5 bikers moved with a deliberate menace, appending salt shakers, slapping metal spoons against their palms, and exchanging sly, guttural laughs. Jennifer watched quietly from her wheelchair, her knuckles whitening slightly on the armrest as she assessed each of them, each movement, every pause in their bravado. The leader, a burly man with a snake tattoo wrapped around his neck, glanced back at his crew with a grin. "Boys," he drawled, his voice like sandpaper scraping against rusted steel, "looks like we've stumbled onto tonight's entertainment." His eyes locked onto Jennifer again, predatory and expectant, as if daring her to react. Jennifer remained motionless. She could see them testing her, searching for signs of fear. She wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. Instead, she met Snake Neck's gaze evenly and tapped her finger once against the countertop, a calculated gesture of nonchalance. "Stay in control.
Stay calm."
One of the other bikers, wiry and wild-eyed, stepped forward and spun a bar stool on its axis with a sharp twist. "You deaf, sweetheart," he sneered. "The boss here's trying to get your attention." Jennifer's lips barely twitched, her voice like ice water. "I heard him just fine." The response seemed to throw them off, if only for a second. The truckers in the corner, a broad-shouldered man with a trucker's cap and another, younger man glued to his phone, sat frozen in a silent stalemate, their eyes darting nervously toward Jennifer. The cashier behind the counter, a teenage boy who looked like he'd never seen real trouble in his life, fumbled with napkins as he tried to keep his head low. Snake Neck leaned on the counter, close enough that Jennifer could smell the alcohol clinging to his breath. "Big words for someone in your position, Wheels." He tapped her wheelchair's armrest deliberately with a greasy finger. "What's in the bag, anyway?" "Snacks for your next pity party." Jennifer didn't answer. Instead, she glanced sideways at the mirror behind counter, catching sight of the back exit door reflected there. 2 bikers near the entrance. 3 more near the booths. She cataloged their positions quickly and felt the familiar weight of her duffel bag on her lap. The coin she'd set on the counter earlier glimmered faintly under the diner's harsh lighting, like a warning beacon. Snake Neck's expression darkened. "You deaf and stupid? I asked you what's in the damn bag." He reached for it. That was his first mistake. Before his fingers could so much as graze the fabric, Jennifer's arm shot out. With a sharp, fluid motion, she slammed the bottom edge of the heavy metal napkin holder against his wrist. There was a sickening crack, followed by a howl of pain that echoed through the diner like a wounded animal. The napkin holder clattered to the ground, leaving Snake Neck stumbling backward, clutching his hand. For a fraction of a second, time froze. The truckers at the corner table stood up, their chairs scraping loudly against the linoleum. The cashier's eyes widened, his jaw hanging slack. The other bikers tensed, stunned by the sudden shift in momentum. Then the chaos erupted. "You bitch!" Snake Neck screamed, rage overtaking his shock. "Get her!" 2 bikers surged forward, but Jennifer was ready. She swung her duffel bag off her lap with surprising force, knocking the first man squarely in the gut and sending him sprawling. The second lunged, but Jennifer ducked low, using her wheelchair's momentum to pivot out of his reach. She snatched a metal serving tray from the counter and flung it, the improvised weapon smacking hard against his jaw. "Get down," the older trucker shouted to the younger man, pushing him toward the corner as the remaining bikers rallied. One kicked over a table, sending plates and silverware scattering as he pulled a chain from his belt loop with a sinister grin. Snake Neck's face twisted with murderous fury as he pointed toward Jennifer. "You're dead, lady. You hear me? Dead." Jennifer didn't respond. She was already moving, calculating every angle, every object in the room. The mirror, the ketchup bottles, the booth dividers. Her training took over, and every inch of the diner became her battleground. The truckers finally sprang into action. The older man grabbed a coffee pot and hurled its steaming contents at one of the bikers, who recoiled with a guttural scream. The younger man snatched a heavy chair, using it as a makeshift shield while shouting, "Call the cops. Call the—" The cashier's trembling hand finally fumbled the phone off its cradle as he dialed with frantic speed. Snakeneck grabbed a diner stool and lifted it high, aiming to smash it over Jennifer's head. But before he could follow through, a deep, gravelly voice cut through the chaos like a gunshot. "Hey!" The room froze. Everyone turned toward the entrance, where a massive figure filled the doorway. Hank, a trucker who'd been sitting quietly at the far end of the diner, loomed like an immovable wall of muscle. His fists were clenched at his sides, veins bulging against the tattoos on his forearms. "You boys picked the wrong night for this," Hank said, his voice as solid as concrete. Beside him, 2 more truckers stepped in from the parking lot, each with expressions that made it clear they weren't here to negotiate. One of them held a length of tire iron, the other a crowbar, both tools gleaming menacingly in the light. Snakeneck's bravado faltered. He looked between the truckers, the wreckage of the diner, and Jennifer, who still sat calmly in her wheelchair, eyes cold and unwavering. "You're done here," Hank growled, taking a step forward. "So, I suggest you pack up your sorry asses and crawl back to wherever you came from." The bikers hesitated. Snakeneck spat on the floor, his face contorting with frustration and pain. "This ain't over," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Jennifer. "Not by a long shot." But the moment had shifted. The bikers began retreating toward the door, dragging their wounded comrades with them. Snakeneck lingered for a moment longer, staring daggers at Jennifer, before finally shoving the door open and stomping outside. The roar of motorcycles shattered the lingering quiet as they sped off into the night, leaving the diner in shambles. Jennifer exhaled slowly, releasing the tight grip she hadn't realized she still had on the armrest. The older trucker stepped toward her, his face still flushed from adrenaline. "You okay, lady?" Jennifer looked at the chaos around her. Overturned tables, shattered dishes, and terrified patrons. She finally nodded.
"For now," she said.
"But they'll be back." The roar of the motorcycles faded into the distance, but the silence they left behind felt heavy, lingering like an unseen weight pressing down on the diner. Jennifer scanned the wreckage with methodical precision, every chair overturned, every shattered plate, every wide-eyed stare of the patrons still crouched behind booths and counters. Her pulse had slowed, her breathing controlled, but her mind buzzed with calculations. Hank leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his broad chest, watching Jennifer carefully. "You sure you're all right, ma'am?" His voice was low, edged with respect after witnessing what she'd done. "I'm fine," Jennifer replied, her tone clipped but steady. Her eyes flicked toward the duffel bag, now resting in her lap again. She'd been careful not to let anyone see its full contents. There were still questions she couldn't answer, not yet. The younger trucker, whose name she would later learn was Sam, stepped up hesitantly, wiping his sweaty palms against his jeans. "They'll come back, won't they? I mean, those guys looked serious." Jennifer turned her head toward the broken front window, her gaze narrowing at the shards of glass scattered across the floor. "They will." The cashier, barely holding it together, piped up from behind the register. "Shouldn't we call someone? The cops, maybe." "We already did," Hank grunted, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the boy. "They'll get here when they get here." Jennifer frowned. Too late to matter. That was the nature of small-town trouble like this. The bikers were organized, coordinated. Gangs like theirs moved quickly, relying on the hesitation of people who didn't know how to fight back. But Jennifer knew better. She'd faced worse in places with no law, no backup, and no way out. The faint hum of an approaching engine interrupted her thoughts. She turned sharply, her instincts flaring again, but this wasn't the bikers returning. A patrol car crawled into the lot, its headlights sweeping over the broken diner sign and the scattered debris outside. Sheriff's Deputy Rick Tanner stepped out of the car with practiced slowness, his flashlight cutting across the damage. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of small-town authority that carried more bark than bite. "What the hell happened here?" Tanner muttered as he approached the door, his boots crunching on the glass. He paused, taking in the wreckage.
Jesus Christ.
The road wolves, Hank replied, his tone biting. Bikers stormed in and started tearing the place up. Again, Tanner cursed under his breath, scratching the back of his neck. His gaze shifted to Jennifer, who remained calm in her chair. "And who are you?" "Someone who fought back," Hank answered for her. Jennifer's gaze remained fixed on the deputy. Something about the way he shifted from one foot to the other, his eyes darting to the corners of the room, set off alarms in her head. He wasn't just overwhelmed, he looked nervous. "And the bikers?"
Tanner asked.
"Where'd they go?" "South, maybe," Sam answered, speaking quickly. "They left just before you pulled up." Tanner exhaled sharply and mumbled something into his radio before turning his attention back to the crowd. "All right, listen up. You all need to clear out of here. Sheriff will want to see this for himself when he gets back. Anyone hurt?" No one responded, but Tanner's flashlight lingered on Jennifer. "You're new around here, right? Where'd you say you were from?" Jennifer's lips thinned. "I didn't." Tanner's brow furrowed. "Well, I'll need a statement." "Later," she replied, her tone firm. "They'll be back, and when they come, they'll bring more." Her words seemed to cut through the air like a knife. The remaining patrons, most of whom were still gathering their wits, shifted nervously. Sam exchanged a wide-eyed glance with Hank, who merely grunted his agreement. "She's right," Hank said. "You let those bastards think they own this place. They'll keep coming back until there's nothing left." Tanner shifted uncomfortably, as if the weight of the problem was pressing against him. "Look, I'll report this to the sheriff, all right? We'll look into it. But you folks need to stay out of it. And let them burn the diner to the ground next time?" Hank barked. "Where were you when they showed up tonight, deputy?" "That's enough," Tanner snapped back, though his voice lacked the confidence to match his words. "We're handling it." "Sure you are," Jennifer muttered under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear. Tanner shot her a sharp look, his hand tightening around his flashlight. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say something, demand something, but he held back. Finally, he turned and marched toward his cruiser. "I'll get someone out here to sweep up. You all clear out. And don't do anything stupid." Once Tanner was gone, the truckers slowly began to relax, gathering their belongings. Hank walked over to Jennifer, his expression dark with thought. "That deputy's scared." You could see it plain as day. Jennifer nodded. "Either scared or bought." "You think he's dirty?" Sam asked nervously. "Doesn't matter," she said, her voice low. "We can't rely on them." "Then what do we do?" Sam's voice cracked, his youthful bravado already thinning. Jennifer looked at the broken window again, the dark road stretching beyond it like a quiet threat. "We prepare." The hours that followed were spent in quiet planning. Hank made a few calls to trucker friends who were still nearby, men and women who wouldn't hesitate to step up when push came to shove. They trickled into the diner one by one, their stoic faces and heavy steps adding weight to the room. Big Steve showed up first, a grizzled bear of a man with oil-stained hands and an unmistakable air of authority. Then came Carla, a mechanic with a grease-streaked bandana tied around her head and a toolbox strapped to her truck. "You sure about this, Hank?" Carla asked, her eyes narrowing at the shattered windows. "The road wolves aren't amateurs." Hank nodded and gestured toward Jennifer. "We've got someone on our side who's not an amateur either." Carla turned her skeptical gaze toward Jennifer, who remained seated calmly by the counter, her duffel bag still in her lap. Carla studied her for a moment, her curiosity piqued. "And you are?" "Someone who knows how to fight," Jennifer answered plainly. "And how to win." Carla's lips curved slightly. "Good enough for me." By the time dawn began breaking over the diner, a quiet determination had settled over the small group that remained. Jennifer sat at the window, watching the horizon as the first slivers of light pierced the darkness. The bikers would return. She knew that much. But this time, they wouldn't find an easy target. Hank, Carla, and the others gathered around the counter, their low voices murmuring plans as they mapped out what needed to be done. Reinforce the windows. Block the back entrance. Set up signals for when someone approached. Jennifer glanced once more at her duffel bag and then out to the road beyond the diner. Let them come, she thought. This time, they wouldn't be walking away so easily. The sun climbed slowly over the horizon, its orange glow spilling across the cracked asphalt of the Crossroads Diner parking lot. In the pale light of early morning, the diner looked like a war zone. Shattered windows, overturned furniture, and traces of last night's chaos etched into every surface. The battered diner was silent now, but not empty. Inside, a small group sat huddled at a corner booth, steam curling from their mugs of coffee, their quiet murmurs interspersed with long, brooding silences. Hank leaned back against the booth, his massive arms folded across his chest as he surveyed the room. "We can't just sit on our asses, Jen," he said finally, his gruff voice cutting through the quiet. "If we don't stand together now, they'll tear this place apart next time." Jennifer sat opposite him, her wheelchair parked tightly against the table. Her expression was calm, but her mind was racing. She knew Hank was right. The road wolves weren't done, not by a long shot, and the next time they rolled in, they wouldn't be testing the waters. They'd come to finish the job. "We need people," she said quietly, her voice carrying an edge of resolve. "People we can trust." Hank grunted and nodded. "I've got a couple trucker buddies parked at a stop 2 towns over. Big Steve'll rally, and man's a magnet for trouble, but he knows how to handle it." "Call him," Jennifer replied, eyes sharp. "And anyone else you trust." Carla, the grease-streak mechanic, leaned over the table, tossing her wrench onto the surface with a clatter. "I've got the local mechanics association on speed dial. Couple of them are ex-military, and a few owe me favors. I'll see what I can do." Sam, the younger trucker, looked up from his phone, his expression still uneasy. I can call some guys too. My uncle runs a tow service just outside the county line. He's not much for fighting, but his guys know how to block roads." Jennifer looked at each of them, nodding in turn. "Good. We're going to need all of them." "Why?" Sam asked, the uncertainty in his voice betraying his nerves. "I mean, we're just regular folks. How do we fight guys like them?" Jennifer met his gaze squarely, her expression softening but losing none of its intensity. "Because it's not just about us. It's about every diner, every truck stop, every small business they've bullied into submission. They thrive on fear, Sam. The only way to stop them is to show them we're not afraid." Hank grunted approvingly. "Damn right." The hours ticked by, and soon the quiet rumble of diesel engines broke the stillness outside. One by one, trucks began pulling into the lot, some small rigs, others the massive long-haul kind, their chrome fronts glinting under the rising sun. The first to step out was Big Steve, a towering figure whose size alone made him look like he could level a building. His thick beard and grizzled face were streaked with road dust, but his piercing eyes missed nothing as they scanned the damaged diner. "Hank," he rumbled, shaking hands with the big trucker before jerking his thumb toward Jennifer. "This the woman who stood him down?" Hank nodded. "That's her." Big Steve turned his attention to Jennifer, eyeing her wheelchair for only a moment before offering a nod of respect. "Heard you gave him hell. That's more than most." Jennifer tilted her head up to meet his gaze. "I'm not most." Steve chuckled darkly. "Fair enough." He turned and waved to his crew, 6 burly men and women who began unloading supplies from their rigs. Chains, tools, wooden planks, and steel bars. "We're here to help. Just tell us where you want us." As the morning stretched on, more allies trickled in. Carla's mechanics arrived next, pulling up in battered trucks covered in grease stains and loaded with equipment. The group, 5 strong, looked like they'd walked straight out of a garage, their faces streaked with oil and their tool belts jingling with every step. "I brought what we could scrounge," Carla said, gesturing to her crew as they hauled out welding kits and steel sheets. "We'll reinforce the windows and lock up the back door so tight a tank couldn't get through it." "Good," Jennifer said, rolling closer to inspect the materials. "We'll funnel them through the front entrance. If they're coming, we decide where the fight happens." A grizzled farmer named Owen showed up next, driving a tractor that looked older than most of the people in the lot. He climbed down slowly, brushing dirt off his overalls as he made his way over to Jennifer. "Hank said you're looking for hands. I can't swing much of a fist anymore, but I know how to run a machine, and I've got some fencing wire that might slow him down. Jennifer offered a rare smile. We'll take it. Set up whatever barriers you can on the perimeter. By noon, the Crossroads parking lot had transformed into a hive of activity. Big Steve's truckers worked to position their rigs in strategic locations, forming makeshift barricades at the diner's entrance. Carla's mechanics welded steel sheets over the broken windows and reinforced the doors, their tools sparking in bursts of bright light as they labored. Inside, Hank, Sam, and the rest of the volunteers rearranged the tables and counters, creating defensive positions near the front door. Owen rigged his tractor to pull fencing wire across the far end of the lot, while another volunteer set up floodlights scavenged from a nearby farm supply store. Jennifer moved through it all like a general inspecting her troops, giving orders and refining the strategy in her mind. Her duffel bag stayed close at hand, though no one questioned its contents. The coin she'd set on the counter earlier, the polished emblem of her old Special Forces unit, remained tucked into her palm like a totem, its weight grounding her. "You know this won't scare them off," Carla said as she tightened a bolt near the front window. "They'll see all this pee. Rep work as a challenge." Jennifer's gaze was distant as she watched Big Steve's crew position the final truck in place. "Good," she said quietly. "Let them come. We'll be ready." By early afternoon, the sun beat down hard, but the group gathered under its unrelenting glare, faces grim and determined. Jennifer rolled her chair to the center of the lot where everyone had gathered, her voice carrying strong and steady. "I know some of you are scared," she began.
And you should be.
"The road wolves aren't small-time trouble. They're organized, dangerous, and used to getting their way. But here's what they don't understand." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. "They're not just fighting one person. They're fighting all of us. Every trucker, every mechanic, every farmer who decided this place is worth protecting. They think they can break us, but they're wrong. Because when good people stand together, we don't just survive. We win." A low rumble of agreement moved through the crowd. Hank clapped a massive hand on Sam's shoulder. Carla grinned, her wrench spinning deftly in her hand. Big Steve crossed his arms, a slow, satisfied smile curling through his beard. "They'll come back," Jennifer continued. "Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. But when they do, we'll show them what happens when you push people too far. We'll show them what happens when you target the wrong diner." The group erupted into cheers, fists raised high. In that moment, the Crossroads Diner wasn't just a truck stop. It was a fortress, a symbol of defiance that no gang or biker crew could intimidate. Jennifer gripped the coin in her palm tighter as the crowd dispersed, returning to their preparations. She gazed out over the road stretching beyond the diner, her thoughts already turning to the fight ahead. Let them come, she thought again. They wouldn't know what hit them. The afternoon sun burned low on the horizon as Crossroads Diner transformed into something resembling a fortified outpost. The preparations had moved swiftly, an unlikely army of truckers, mechanics, and townsfolk rallying behind Jennifer's quiet resolve. Every person brought something: skills, tools, experience, and for the first time in years, the diner buzzed with a sense of collective purpose. Jennifer sat near the window, her eyes constantly scanning the perimeter as her mind cataloged every detail: the barricades, the escape routes, and the defensive positions they'd carved out. Carla's team had reinforced the main entrance, welding steel plates across the broken doors and window frames. Floodlights, rigged with car batteries, had been positioned to cast sharp beams of light across the parking lot as soon as darkness fell. Truckers' rigs had been parked like a wall, blocking every obvious route into the diner. Big Steve clapped his calloused hands together, dusting off the work. "We're as ready as we're gonna be." He looked down at Jennifer with a rare expression of concern. "But you sure about this plan? When they come, it's gonna be ugly." Jennifer met his gaze, unflinching. "If we don't make a stand now, they'll never stop. Today it's the diner. Tomorrow it's somewhere else, someone weaker." Hank, standing nearby, grunted in agreement. "She's right. We've all seen it. These bastards move like a plague, squeeze one place dry, then move on to the next." "Not this time," Carla added, leaning on her wrench like it was a battle axe. "I'd rather they know we're ready to fight than roll over like every other town they've hit." As if to punctuate her point, Owen's tractor growled to life outside. The retired farmer had dragged stacks of old fencing wire across the parking lot, winding it between the rigs to create a makeshift barricade. "Trip wires," he'd explained to Jennifer earlier. "Most bikers are cocky. They won't see 'em until it's too late." Jennifer nodded approvingly as she watched him work. "It'll slow them down. That's all we need." The diner's interior was a hive of activity. While the mechanics reinforced walls and windows, Big Steve and Hank laid out tools that could serve as makeshift weapons: heavy wrenches, steel rods, tire irons, and metal trays. The truckers, men and women who'd spent their lives navigating lonely highways, stood in small groups, sharing quiet words and hard stares. This wasn't their first time facing danger, though it was perhaps their first time preparing for war at a diner. At a corner booth, Jennifer met with the core team: Hank, Carla, Big Steve, and a wiry young man named Frankie, an ex-scout sniper who'd been living quietly in the town, fixing appliances. Frankie's sharp eyes missed nothing. He leaned forward, sketching quick marks on a hand-drawn map of the diner's surroundings. "We've got sight lines here and here," he said, pointing to the north and south approaches. "When they come in, because they will come in, they'll try to surround us first, maybe take out the lights." "Let him try," Carla muttered, tightening a bolt on her welding gear. "I rigged backups. Won't go dark for more than a few seconds." Jennifer looked at Frankie. "And if they break through the barricades?" Frankie grinned, his sharp teeth flashing like a predator's. "Then they'll find out how truck stop coffee pots and crowbars feel when they hit bone." A small, satisfied murmur went around the table. Jennifer smiled faintly. "Good." Sam, still shaken but determined, leaned in. "And the police? Think they'll come this time?" The question hung heavy in the air. Jennifer's gaze darkened. "We can't count on them. Even if they do show up, it'll be too late. It's us or nothing." Hank nodded, as if that was the final word. "Then it's us." As dusk crept across the horizon, the diner's floodlights snapped to life, bathing the parking lot in harsh white beams. Shadows danced along the edges of the road, where the darkened highway stretched endlessly into nothing. Jennifer rolled herself to the entrance and stared out into the gloom. There was a feeling in the air, thick and electric, like the stillness before a storm. "They'll wait until full dark," she said quietly, as Hank joined her at the doorway. "You sure?" Jennifer's hand drifted to the polished coin in her lap. The emblem, familiar, heavy, reminded her of who she was, of who she used to be.
"Yeah."
"Bullies like them think night gives them the advantage." Hank sighed, shaking his head. "Feels like we're waiting for something worse than trouble." "We are." Jennifer's voice was soft, but firm. She glanced back into the diner. Carla's crew stood at the ready, their tools now looking far more like weapons. The truckers clustered in small groups, their faces lined with resolve. Owen sat near the far window, shotgun balanced across his knees, his eyes fixed on the road. Jennifer turned her attention back to the horizon. "Let them come," she thought again, her heart steady. "They won't be ready for what we've built." Around 9 p.m., the first sign of trouble arrived. The low rumble of engines carried on the wind like a distant thunderstorm, faint at first, then growing louder. Jennifer's muscles coiled. She recognized that sound. It wasn't just bikes. It was the unified growl of an entire convoy. Carla appeared at Jennifer's side, her face pale but determined. "They're here." Jennifer rolled forward, the headlights outside catching the faint dust cloud in the distance. Soon, silhouettes of motorcycles appeared, dozens of them, spread out like a pack of wolves stalking their prey. Behind the bikes, 2 black SUVs rumbled into view, their headlights piercing the darkness like twin searchlights. The parking lot fell silent, save for the hum of the diner's lights. Inside, everyone froze. Big Steve adjusted his grip on a tire iron. Sam gritted his teeth, clutching a length of chain like his life depended on it. "Positions," Jennifer said, her voice carrying like a general's command. Hank, Carla, and the others nodded, moving quickly to their places. The truckers crouched behind the rigs, ready to respond. Carla's team lingered near the diner entrance, steel wrenches in hand. Frankie vanished into the shadows near the back, his sniper instincts kicking in. Jennifer stayed by the front window, watching as the convoy slowed. The motorcycles spread out in a loose formation, circling the lot like sharks scenting blood. Snake Neck led the pack, his face twisted into a cruel grin as he revved his bike. The SUVs parked behind the bikes, doors cracking open just enough to show silhouettes inside. Snake Neck's voice carried through the night as he dismounted, shouting across the lot. "I told you this wasn't over, lady. You should have rolled away when you had the chance." Jennifer didn't move, her voice calm and cutting. "Last chance to leave." Snake Neck laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You don't get it, do you? We own this road. We own places like this. And now we're gonna burn it to the ground." Behind her, Hank muttered, "They're gonna push." Jennifer nodded. "Then we push back." Snake Neck turned to his gang and raised a fist. No survivors. The bikers surged forward, engines roaring like a symphony of chaos. Jennifer's fingers tightened around the armrests of her chair, her voice calm and clear.
"Now."
The diner's floodlights flared brighter as Owen's tripwires went taut, sending the first line of bikers crashing to the ground. Engines sputtered and roared in confusion as bodies hit asphalt, the ambush beginning before the bikers knew what was happening. Inside the diner, Carla's voice rang out, "Let's go." The defenders of Crossroads surged forward as chaos exploded in the parking lot. The road wolves swarmed the diner like a plague, their motorcycles shrieking through the night as chaos exploded across the parking lot. Engines roared, tires skidded, and headlights swept erratically over the scene as Owen's tripwires did their job. The first wave of bikers hit the ground hard, motorcycles careening into rigs, chains tangling in their spokes. The clattering of metal and the sound of bodies hitting asphalt drowned out the snarling commands of Snake Neck. From her position near the diner's entrance, Jennifer watched with a predator's calm. The road wolves were stunned, unprepared for the fortifications they'd roared into. That's the key, she thought. Shock them first. Make them doubt their dominance. Hold the line. Hank barked, his voice carrying like thunder over the chaos. The defenders sprang into action. Big Steve led the charge from behind the trucks, his massive frame silhouetted in the floodlights as he swung a tire iron like a war club. The heavy weapons smashed into the nearest biker, sending the man sprawling to the ground. Another lunged at Steve with a chain, but Steve sidestepped the strike and delivered a bone-crunching punch that echoed like a hammer blow. Carla's team burst from their positions near the diner's reinforced entrance, tools in hand. Carla herself wielded a hefty wrench, spinning it with the practiced ease of someone who had spent her life fixing problems, metal ones at least. She dropped low as a biker swung a bat, ducking under his strike and driving her wrench into his knee with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground, screaming. "Thought you were tough?" Carla spat, standing over him. The remaining bikers regrouped, their initial confusion turning to fury. Snake Neck stood tall near the center of the parking lot, his voice booming through the chaos. "Get up, you idiots. Take 'em down." Jennifer watched carefully, her sharp gaze calculating the enemy's movements. Snake Neck's voice was steady, commanding, even as his men faltered. He's the one holding them together, she thought. Take him down, and they'll crumble. Sam crouched low behind a nearby truck, his trembling hands gripping the length of chain he'd brought. His eyes darted toward Jennifer, and she gave him a slight nod of reassurance. "Focus, Sam. Just remember what we practiced. Stay low. Don't let them corner you." "Got it," Sam whispered, though his voice shook. Jennifer's wheelchair rolled forward slightly, her duffel bag now resting firmly in her lap. She took a breath, then called out, her voice sharp and commanding. "Snake Neck." The leader's head snapped toward the diner, his eyes narrowing when he saw her. "You again," he sneered, stomping toward her, his boots echoing like gunshots against the asphalt. "Lady, you're starting to piss me off." Jennifer didn't flinch. "That's the idea." Snake Neck's sneer twisted into a grin. You've got a mouth on you, but let's see if you've got any fight left. He reached for a long knife strapped to his belt, its blade gleaming under the floodlights. Bad move, Jennifer muttered, her voice low. Before Snake Neck could close the distance, a sudden roar of a diesel engine shattered the air. One of Big Steve's trucker allies had climbed into the cab of his rig, and now the massive vehicle was surging forward, its horn blaring like an enraged beast. The bikers scattered as the semi barreled across the lot, headlights blazing. "Watch out," someone screamed, but it was too late. The truck clipped a motorcycle, sending it spinning into the darkness as the rig screeched to a halt. Snake Neck turned sharply, his focus momentarily torn from Jennifer. It was all the opening she needed. In one swift motion, she grabbed a small, black object from her duffel bag, a flare gun. She aimed and fired. The flare shot through the air with a sharp hiss, striking the hood of one of the black SUVs parked near the lot's edge. The flare burst into a blinding shower of red sparks, lighting up the night like a firework. The vehicles had caught fire instantly, flames licking upward and casting long, flickering shadows across the chaos. "What the hell?" Snake Neck roared as he stumbled backward, his confidence cracking as the flames reflected in his wide eyes. Jennifer's voice cut through the din. "You wanted a fight? You've got one." The defenders surged again. Carla's team descended on the scattered bikers with a vengeance. Big Steve waded into the fray like a wrecking ball, his tire irons smashing helmets and knocking bikers off their feet. Hank moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, grabbing one biker by the jacket and hurling him face-first into the side of a rig. Frankie, stationed at the back of the diner, was deadly with his aim. Armed with a slingshot and heavy ball bearings, he struck down bikers trying to regroup in the shadows. Each well-placed shot brought down another target, the impacts sharp and brutal. The road wolves began to falter. Their organized assault turned chaotic as they realized they were outmatched, not by numbers, but by the defenders' resolve. This wasn't a simple takeover, it was a war they hadn't prepared for. Snake Neck bellowed orders, his voice growing more ragged with every shout. "Keep pushing. They can't hold us forever." But Jennifer saw the cracks forming. The bikers were hesitating now, their confidence shaken. Good, she thought. Keep pushing them until they break. Suddenly, the blaring of more engines filled the night air. Jennifer turned sharply, her heart sinking as another group of motorcycles roared into view from the far end of the lot. A dozen new riders, reinforcements called in to turn the tide. Snake Neck's face lit up with savage glee as the reinforcements rolled in. "Now you're screwed," he shouted at the defenders. Big Steve, breathing heavily, turned to Jennifer. "We can't hold this many, Jen." Jennifer's mind raced, but her voice remained steady. "We don't have to hold them forever. Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" Sam cried, his chain dangling limply in his hands. Jennifer looked toward the road beyond the parking lot. In the distance, faint but growing louder, the wail of sirens split the night air. "Long enough for them to get here," she said. Snake Neck heard the sirens too, his expression contorted into a mix of fury and panic. No. The defenders pressed the advantage. Big Steve and Carla redoubled their efforts, their strikes landing harder as the bikers faltered. Frankie picked off the new riders as they tried to dismount, his aim unerring. Snake Neck staggered toward his motorcycle, desperate to escape. Jennifer saw him move and wheeled forward, intercepting his path. "You're not going anywhere," she said coldly. Snake Neck raised his knife, his face twisted in rage. "I'll kill you." Jennifer didn't hesitate. She reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a crowbar. With a sharp swing, she knocked the knife from his grip and drove the bar into his shin. Snake Neck howled and collapsed to the ground, clutching his leg. The sirens were deafening now. Squad cars barreled into the lot, red and blue lights flashing as deputies poured out, weapons drawn. "Freeze!" one of them shouted. The fight was over. Snake Neck lay sprawled on the asphalt, his face pale and furious as two officers hauled him to his feet. The remaining road wolves dropped their weapons and surrendered one by one, the fight finally draining out of them as the police took control. Jennifer sat motionless in her wheelchair, watching as the dust settled. The defenders of Crossroads Diner stood victorious, bloodied and bruised but unbowed. Big Steve let out a long breath and clapped Hank on the back. "We held, damn it. We held." Jennifer stared down at Snake Neck as he was shoved into a squad car. Her voice was quiet but firm.
"I told you," she said.
"You picked the wrong diner." The flashing red and blue lights of the squad cars cast long, jagged shadows across the parking lot. The air still crackled with tension, filled with the mingling smells of burning rubber, gasoline, and sweat. Crossroads Diner stood at the center of it all, its windows shattered, its walls scorched, but still standing. Jennifer sat at the front of the diner, her wheelchair positioned like a sentry's post. Her face remained calm, but her eyes scanned the scene, cataloging every detail. Around her, the defenders of Crossroads, Big Steve, Carla, Hank, Sam, and the others, stood together, battered but victorious. Deputies moved quickly, securing the surviving bikers one by one. Snake Neck was dragged toward a patrol car, his limp form barely resisting as cuffs clicked around his wrists. His face, pale with exhaustion and rage, turned toward Jennifer as they passed. "You're dead," he growled through gritted teeth, spitting blood onto the asphalt. "You hear me?
Dead."
Jennifer didn't blink. Her voice was steady, low enough that only he could hear it. "Not tonight, Snake. And not by you." The deputy slammed the car door shut, and Snake Neck disappeared behind tinted glass. The sheriff, Tom Cooper, stepped out of his vehicle, his face set in a grim expression. His boots crunched on broken glass as he surveyed the chaos around him, the scorched SUVs, motorcycles strewn like toys, and the bruised defenders still catching their breath. The scene told a clear story. "Hell of a night," Cooper muttered, pulling off his hat and wiping his brow. He turned to Jennifer, his gaze hardening. "Mind telling me what the hell happened here?" Jennifer didn't answer immediately. She gestured towards Snake Neck's crew, still being rounded up by deputies. "You've got your answers right there. The road wolves came looking for blood. We gave them more fight than they expected." Cooper's eyes narrowed. "This is vigilante stuff, Jennifer. People could have been killed." "People would have been killed if we didn't fight back," she shot back. "You and I both know it." Hank stepped in, his deep voice carrying weight. "Sheriff, these people were protecting what's theirs. You weren't here. You didn't see how those bastards rolled in. They didn't want money or power. They wanted destruction." Cooper sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose as if trying to stave off a headache. He looked back at the reinforcements now streaming into the lot, the UDs, paramedics, and even the fire department. "We'll sort it out," he grumbled. "But this mess," he gestured toward the wreckage. "This is just the start of something worse." Jennifer's gaze sharpened. "Then we'd better be ready for it." Cooper shook his head, frustration clear in his posture. "I'll take their statements back at the station, but mark my words, this isn't over. You think those bikers are the whole problem? They're just the foot soldiers. Someone bigger sent them here, and whoever's behind this won't let this slide." Jennifer exchanged a look with Hank and Big Steve. "We know," she said quietly. As the last of the road wolves were loaded into patrol cars, the defenders of Crossroads began to regroup. Carla sat on the steps of the diner, wiping a streak of grease from her forehead with the back of her hand. "We got lucky tonight," she said, her voice low. "Next time they'll bring more. And it won't just be bikers." "They'll bring professionals," Jennifer agreed, her tone grim. "Mercenaries. People who know how to handle a fight like this." Sam, who had been sitting quietly near the back of a rig, looked up with wide, fearful eyes. "Then what do? We held him off tonight, but we're just regular people." Hank crossed his arms, his face set in determination. "Not anymore, we're not. Tonight, we proved that we're stronger together than they thought. And next time, we'll be ready." Jennifer turned to face the group, her voice carrying over the growing quiet. "They underestimated us once. They won't make that mistake again. But we've got something they don't, a reason to fight." She looked toward the diner, its flickering neon signs sputtering weakly in the dark. "This place, this town, it's not just another stop for them to take over. It's ours. And we don't back down. Big Steve rumbled his agreement, clapping a heavy hand on Sam's shoulder. We've got work to do, kid. Reinforce, repair, and get everyone we trust on board. This isn't just about the diner anymore. It's about sending a message. To who? Sam asked nervously. To the people behind this, Jennifer replied. Whoever sent the road wolves here is watching us now. And when they come, we're going to show them that they chose the wrong place to mess with. As dawn began to creep across the horizon, the parking lot fell quiet. The deputies had gone, the last of the patrol cars disappearing down the long stretch of empty road. The defenders of Crossroads were exhausted but resolute, their bruises and scrapes proof of the battle they had fought and won. Inside the diner, Hank poured fresh coffee for those who remained. Big Steve sat at the counter, his massive frame slumped in a seat that looked far too small for him. Carla dozed with her head resting on her arms, her wrench still clutched tightly in her hand. Jennifer rolled her chair to the window, staring out at the parking lot where debris still littered the ground. The coin she carried, a polished emblem of her old Special Forces unit, sat balanced in her palm, its surface catching the first light of day. Hank stepped up beside her, his voice low. You all right? I'm fine, Jennifer replied, though her expression remained distant. But this isn't over, Hank. We sent a message tonight, but so did they. Hank sighed. You think they'll come back? Jennifer's gaze hardened. I know they will. And next time, it won't just be bikers looking to prove themselves. It'll be something worse. So, what's the plan? Jennifer's fingers closed tightly around the coin as she turned to face him. We get ready. We rally more people we trust. This isn't just our fight anymore, Hank. The road wolves and whoever's pulling their strings want to scare us into giving up. She looked back out at the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight had begun to cut through the night's darkness. But they don't understand. This place, these people, they're not afraid anymore. Hank nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. Then let's make sure they never forget it. The two of them stood in silence for a long moment, watching as the day broke over Crossroads Diner. The fight wasn't over, but the defenders were no longer alone. A community had begun to rise, one built on trust, resolve, and the unshakable belief that some things were worth protecting. Jennifer turned away from the window, her voice quiet but firm. We'll be ready when they come. And this time, she thought to herself, they wouldn't just survive. They would win. The diner was quieter now, its heartbeat slowed to a tired rhythm. The morning light spilled through the makeshift barricades, cutting across tables littered with empty mugs and tools. Jennifer sat in the back corner, staring down at the polished coin in her palm, its familiar weight grounding her in the silence. She hadn't slept. None of them really had. The previous night's battle had turned Crossroads Diner into both a fortress and a symbol. They had won for now. But Jennifer knew better than anyone that battles were only parts of wars. The road wolves were broken, not defeated. The question of who sent them and why loomed heavy in her thoughts. Hank's deep voice broke the silence. You need to eat something. Jennifer looked up as he placed a plate in front of her. 2 slices of toast and a scoop of scrambled eggs. He sank into the chair across from her, his face etched with concern. You've been staring at that coin for hours. What's going on in that head of yours? She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the plate, then back to the coin. Finally, she spoke. Do you know what this is? Hank frowned, glancing at the object in her hand. I've seen it before. Military, right? Special Forces. Jennifer's voice was soft, carrying a quiet weight. This coin's from my unit. A reminder of the men and women I served with. Some of them didn't make it back. Hank leaned back in his chair, his arms folding across his chest as he watched her carefully. And you did. Jennifer's fingers tightened around the coin.
Yeah, but not all of me.
The words hung in the air, sharp and unspoken for far too long. Hank didn't press her, but the look in his eyes said he understood. Jennifer exhaled slowly, her thoughts drifting back to that day. 2 years earlier. The sun had been blinding, glaring off the endless expanse of sand that stretched in every direction. Jennifer had crouched behind a broken wall, the weight of her gear pressing into her shoulders as adrenaline flooded her system. The sounds of gunfire echoed like distant thunder. Eagle 1, we're pinned down at the east sector. Request immediate evac. The voice in her earpiece belonged to Sergeant Diaz, a man she trusted with her life. Jennifer's team was deep in hostile territory, their mission compromised. Her orders had been clear: get the civilians out, no matter the cost. Copy that, Diaz, Jennifer replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. Hold position. We're coming to you. She gave the signal to her team, 5 soldiers she considered family. They moved with precision, their training guiding them as they advanced under fire. Jennifer led them, her instincts razor-sharp as she calculated every step. But then the blast hit. Jennifer never saw the RPG coming. The explosion ripped through the alleyway, sending her sprawling across the ground. Dust and debris choked the air as her ears rang, the world spinning in a haze of fire and noise. She remembered trying to move, trying to shout for her team, but her legs wouldn't respond. Through the haze, she saw Diaz. He was dragging civilians to safety, shouting orders to the rest of the team. They were still fighting, still moving. But Jennifer couldn't. She was down, and she knew it. When they finally pulled her out, she remembered the look in Diaz's eyes, the guilt, the anguish, as he realized their leader wouldn't walk again. Jennifer blinked, the memory dissolving into the quiet of the diner. She looked at Hank, her expression unreadable. I was the one who called the shots that day. I got them out, but I didn't come back whole. Hank's voice was quiet. You blame yourself. I failed, Jennifer snapped, more harshly than she intended. She exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. I promised I'd always have their backs. And then I couldn't even get on my feet.
Hank didn't argue.
Instead, he leaned forward, his voice steady. You saved lives. That's not failure. Jennifer shook her head, her hands clenching around the coin. Doesn't matter what anyone says, Hank. I lost the fight that day. And I told myself I'd never let that happen again. Hank studied her for a moment before speaking. You didn't lose last night. Jennifer glanced up sharply, but Hank held her gaze. You didn't lose, Jen. You fought, and you kept these people safe. Whatever happened in the past, it doesn't own you anymore. Jennifer didn't respond, but something in Hank's words lingered, settling in her mind like a seed waiting to grow. The door to the diner swung open, the small bell above it jangling harshly. Carla stomped in, her boots leaving smudges of grease across the floor. Bad news, she said, her voice clipped. Jennifer turned, her focus sharpening. What is it? Carla dropped a tattered piece of paper onto the table in front of her. One of the deputies dropped this off. Sheriff's orders. Looks like they're shutting the diner down. Hank's face twisted with disbelief. Shutting us down? After everything we just did to save this place. Some crap about safety violations, Carla said, crossing her arms. Broken windows, fire damage, whatever excuse they could find. Sheriff Cooper's not backing us up on this one. Jennifer picked up the paper, her expression darkening as she read it. This isn't about safety. It's pressure. Someone wants us gone, and they're using the law to finish what the road wolves couldn't. Hank slammed his fist onto the table, his voice a growl. So, we're just supposed to roll over? Let M win. Jennifer shook her head.
No.
We fight back. But not just with fists this time. We need proof, something that ties the road wolves to whoever's pulling their strings. We take that proof to the world, and we take away their power. Carla nodded grimly. Then we'd better start digging. Jennifer looked at Hank and the others, her resolve hardening. Get everyone back here tonight. If they're trying to scare us into quitting, they'll find out just how stubborn we can be. She turned the coin over in her hand one last time, its surface warm from her grip. I lost the fight once, she thought. I won't lose this one. This time, Jennifer wouldn't just protect what mattered. She'd expose the truth. And whoever thought they could silence Crossroads Diner was about to regret underestimating her again. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting fiery streaks of orange and red across the darkening sky, the Crossroads Diner hummed with quiet urgency. The sheriff's orders had lit a fire in the group, a resolve more determined than fearsome. Jennifer sat at the center of it all, the tattered shutdown notice crumpled in her lap, as plans unfolded around her like clockwork. Carla wiped her hands on her grease-streaked jeans, her voice sharp as she mapped out their next move. We need intel. If someone's pulling the road wolves' strings, they're sloppy enough to leave breadcrumbs. Maybe a name, maybe a payoff, something. We dig in the right places, we'll find it. Hank grunted his agreement. And we start with the wolves we took down last night. Someone's gotta know something. Jennifer's mind ticked through possibilities like a machine. We need leverage. Snake Neck's in custody, but someone lower on the ladder might crack. If we can find a weak link, we push it. Push how? Sam asked nervously, his hands fidgeting with an empty mug. Jennifer turned her gaze on him, her eyes sharp but steady. We make it clear that whoever talks first might get out of this alive. The rest won't. Sam swallowed hard but nodded. The plan came together quickly. Frankie, the ex-scout sniper with a knack for surveillance, disappeared from the diner shortly after sunset. He'd taken his old scouting gear, a high-powered scope, radio scanner, and an uncanny ability to move unnoticed, into the woods near the sheriff's office. Jennifer knew Snake Neck and his crew wouldn't sit quiet in a holding cell for long. Someone would come looking for them, or someone higher up would cut a deal to get them out. Meanwhile, Carla and Hank worked on repairs to the diner, reinforcing what they could while keeping their ears to the ground. Local mechanics and truckers still coming in and out of town brought snippets of conversation, rumors of payments being made, deliveries happening late at night on abandoned stretches of road, and outsiders seen meeting with the wolves days before the attack. Someone's paying for chaos, Hank growled as he paced the kitchen, his boots thudding heavily on the tile. This doesn't feel random anymore. The wolves might enjoy throwing their weight around, but they're following orders. Jennifer nodded, her thoughts darkening. And whoever's behind it didn't expect us to fight back. They won't make that mistake again, Carla said as she tightened a bolt on the diner's newly reinforced door. Which means next time, they'll hit harder. Jennifer's gaze settled on the coin she still carried, turning it over and over in her palm. The weight of it was familiar, like a tether to a version of herself she hadn't fully let go of. The silence in the room was broken by Frankie's voice crackling through Hank's old CB radio. You're gonna want to hear this. Frankie's voice came, low and urgent. Snake Neck's already out. What? Hank barked, leaning closer to the radio. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the back of the station 10 minutes ago, Frankie reported. Sheriff Cooper let him out himself.
No cuffs. No de pietas.
Jennifer's jaw tightened. Did you see who was driving? Couldn't get a good look, but they weren't bikers. Too clean.
Suits, I think.
Whatever this is, it's bigger than we thought. Jennifer exhaled slowly, frustration simmering beneath her calm surface. They've got someone in law enforcement, or above, paving the way for them. Snake Neck and his crew are just muscle. Frankie's voice cut back in. They're headed south. I'm gonna tail but don't expect miracles. If I lose the signal, you'll know why. The radio went dead. Carla slammed a wrench onto the counter, her voice shaking with anger. Sheriff's in on it. I knew that bastard was dirty. Jennifer wheeled back from the table, her mind snapping into focus. It doesn't matter how high this goes. The suits, the wolves, they made a mistake letting Snake Neck back out so soon. They think they're untouchable. What's the play? Hank asked, his voice steady, like a soldier waiting for orders. Jennifer's eyes glinted with cold purpose. We show them they're wrong. The night stretched long as Jennifer and her team prepared. Carla worked the phone lines, calling in mechanics from 2 neighboring towns. Hank reached out to trusted truckers still parked at rest stops, spreading the word about what had happened and what was coming next. Frankie sent brief updates through the CB radio, reporting Snake Neck's movements as the convoy he followed snaked its way to an old lumberyard on the outskirts of town. Their holdup, Frankie finally radioed just past midnight. Looks like they're unloading something. Trucks, crates, I don't know. But it's big. Jennifer stared at the map Hank had spread across the diner's counter. The lumberyard was remote, surrounded by dense woods, and far enough out of town that no one would stumble across whatever they were planning. "This isn't just about us," she said, her voice low. "They're staging something." "Then let's hit them first," Big Steve said, his massive form looming at the entrance. He'd returned from a supply run, tire iron slung casually over his shoulder. "We know where they are. We've got people. Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong crowd." Jennifer shook her head. "Not yet. We don't know what they're planning. We need proof, something we can use to expose them." "Expose them to who?" Carla asked, exasperated. "The sheriff's on their side, and half the deputies look ready to roll over for a paycheck." "To everyone else," Jennifer replied firmly. "If we show the world who they are and what they're doing, they lose their power. Fear only works when people don't know what they're up against." Hank looked at her thoughtfully. "And what if they come after us harder once they know we're digging?" Jennifer's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Then we dig faster." By the time the group split up, the plan was clear. Frankie would continue surveillance on the lumberyard, reporting movements and numbers back to the diner. Carla and Hank would spread the word quietly, rallying anyone they could who wasn't afraid to stand up to the wolves. And Jennifer? She'd lead the charge when the time came. Sitting alone in the empty diner, the hum of the CB radio her only company, Jennifer turned the coin over in her hand one last time. The polished emblem gleamed under the harsh glow of the diner's fluorescent lights. Failure isn't an option, she thought. Not anymore. The memory of that day, of sand and fire and her helplessness, burned in her mind. She had lost the fight once. She had let herself be broken. But not this time. This time, she would stand for those who couldn't. This time, she wouldn't fail. As the darkness outside grew deeper, the faint rumble of engines echoed far off in the distance, beyond the roads, beyond the trees. The fight wasn't over. But Jennifer was ready. The night was heavy, the kind of oppressive dark that seemed to smother everything beneath it. Out in the distance, at the old lumberyard, faint lights flickered between the thick lines of trees, distant, but unmistakable. Jennifer sat near the window of Crossroads Diner, her chair positioned like a commander at the edge of a battlefield. Around her, the defenders of Crossroads were gathering for what they all understood was the final confrontation. Hank paced near the counter, his fists clenching and unclenching. They're dug in at the lumberyard. Frankie says Snake Neck's crew is there, but there's more: trucks, SUVs, and men in suits. Looks like reinforcements. Big Steve sat sharpening a crowbar with deliberate movements, his eyes fixed on the steel. "I count about 30 of us between truckers, Carla's mechanics, and the farmers. Better than I thought we'd get, but it's not enough for a head-on fight." Jennifer studied the makeshift map they'd drawn of the lumberyard. The place was sprawling: abandoned warehouses, old logging roads, rusting equipment that would serve as perfect cover. "It won't be a head-on fight," she said, her voice calm but cold. "We're not charging in. We're dismantling them piece by piece." Carla leaned over the table, her grease-streaked hands flat on the counter. "And if we don't?" Jennifer looked up, her gaze like tempered steel. "Then they take this place, and they take everything else after it. I don't know about you, but I'm not giving them that option." The room fell silent. Around the diner, faces hardened, men and women who had spent their lives on the road, in garages, on farms, all of them brought together by necessity and the need to protect something that mattered. "This isn't just about us," Jennifer continued. "The road wolves and whoever's behind them are used to people running scared. That ends tonight. We're going to hit them where it hurts, and we're going to make sure they know we're not backing down." Hank raised an eyebrow. "And how do we do that, exactly?" Jennifer's gaze swept across the room. "We're going to take their lumberyard and expose what they're hiding. Frankie's still watching them. If they're staging something there, we'll find it, and we'll blow this wide open. If we hit fast, we'll catch them before they can regroup." Big Steve grinned, hefting his crowbar. "Now you're speaking my language." An hour later, the convoy rolled out of Crossroads Diner. The defenders had cobbled together a mix of vehicles: long-haul trucks, beat-up pickups, and Carla's mechanics' utility vans, all roaring into the night like an army of ghosts. Frankie's voice crackled over the CB radio, guiding them. "They've got watchers near the access road," Frankie reported. "Two guys with flashlights and walkie-talkies. Take them out quiet if you can." Jennifer nodded, even though Frankie couldn't see her. "We'll handle it." The vehicles pulled off the main road one by one, their headlights dimmed. Jennifer rode in the lead truck with Hank, her duffel bag resting against her legs. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, her mind turning over every scenario, every possibility of failure. Not this time, she reminded herself. At the edge of the lumberyard, the convoy stopped, engines humming low. Jennifer wheeled out of the truck, joined immediately by Hank, Carla, Big Steve, and a dozen others. The plan was simple: divide the defenders into 3 teams, one to take out the watchers, one to create a distraction, and the third, Jennifer's team, to infiltrate the main yard and expose whatever the wolves were hiding. Carla turned to Jennifer, wrench spinning in her hand. "You sure about this?" "Going in quiet first." Jennifer's lips curved faintly. Quiet never lasts long. The first watchers went down with barely a sound. Hank and one of the farmers, Owen, crept through the brush and took them out with surprising finesse. A flashlight dropped to the dirt. A radio clicked off. "Clear," Hank whispered through the radio. Jennifer and her team moved in, slipping through the darkness like shadows. The lumberyard loomed before them. Hulking warehouses, stacks of rotting logs, and old machinery rusting in silence. Snakeneck's men patrolled lazily, clearly not expecting trouble. Jennifer's wheelchair glided over the uneven dirt path, her eyes sharp as she signaled for the group to fan out. Frankie had scouted their positions earlier. Guards near the trucks, others watching the perimeter. At the center of the yard, 2 large flatbed trucks sat parked, their tarps drawn tight over mysterious cargo. Jennifer's instincts told her that whatever was under those tarps was the key. Big Steve crouched beside her, his tire iron held like a knight's sword. "What's the call?" Jennifer scanned the yard, her brain piecing it together like a puzzle. "Carla and her team will create the distraction. We get to the trucks and see what they're hiding. Once we've got it, we pull back and signal the rest. And if they see us before then?" Jennifer's fingers curled around the edge of her chair. "Then we hit them harder." Moments later, chaos erupted at the far end of the lumberyard. Carla's team ignited a series of small explosions, old oil drums rigged to fire, and the yard lit up like a battlefield. Flames flickered and smoke billowed into the night as Snakeneck's men scattered, barking orders and scrambling toward the distraction. "Go," Jennifer hissed. Her team moved swiftly. Big Steve led the way, his massive frame shockingly silent as he cleared a path through the chaos. Sam followed close behind, chain in hand, his nervous energy replaced with quiet determination. Jennifer wheeled forward, her focus locked on the flatbed trucks in the center of the yard. Guards sprinted toward the flames, their attention torn away from the real threat. Jennifer reached the first truck and yanked the tarp back with a quick, sharp motion. What she saw made her stomach drop. Underneath the tarp were crates, dozens of them, stamped with military insignia. Jennifer's eyes widened. Weapons. Assault rifles, ammunition, and tactical gear. Enough to supply an army. Hank's voice came through her earpiece. "Jen, what's under there?" "Proof," Jennifer replied, her voice tight. "These aren't just thugs. Someone's arming them for something bigger." But before they could move, a sharp voice shattered the air. "There they are." Jennifer turned sharply as Snakeneck appeared, flanked by a dozen of his men. His face was wild, lit orange by the flames behind him. "I told you this wasn't over," he bellowed, pulling a pistol from his belt. "Kill them." Gunshots rang out, cracking through the night. Sam yelped as a bullet hit the truck beside him, sparks flying. Big Steve roared, hurling his tire iron at one of the guards and knocking him flat. "Move," Jennifer shouted. "Get to cover." The lumberyard exploded into violence. Snakeneck's men opened fire, bullets pinging off metal and wood as Jennifer's team scrambled for safety. Frankie's voice cut through the radio. "More vehicles incoming. They're bringing everyone." Jennifer wheeled behind a stack of crates, her mind racing. We've got the proof. Now we just need to get out alive. Hank's voice crackled through her earpiece. Jen, we're surrounded. Jennifer's grip tightened on her duffel bag. She reached in and pulled out the flare gun, loading a second shot. Her voice was steady as she replied, "Then we fight our way out." She aimed the flare high into the sky, firing a burst of red sparks that lit up the night like a beacon. Let them come, she thought. They wanted war? They'd just found it. The flare burst into the sky like a blood-red comet, its glow illuminating the chaos unfolding below. The lumberyard had become a battlefield, smoke rising in thick plumes, gunfire cracking through the night, and shadows darting between rusting machinery and crumbling buildings. Jennifer wheeled out from behind the crates, her mind locked into the rhythm of survival. The flare wasn't just a call for help, it was a signal for the rest of the defenders waiting at the perimeter. They're coming, she thought. Hold them until they get here. Snakeneck's voice thundered through the yard, his rage twisting every word. Find them. Don't let anyone leave alive. His men surged forward, weapons raised, their boots pounding against gravel and dirt. From her cover, Jennifer could see Big Steve hurling a wrench like a missile, knocking a biker off his feet with a satisfying thud. Sam had taken cover behind the flatbed, his knuckles white around the chain in his hand. The kid was breathing hard, but his eyes were sharp now, fear replaced by determination. Hank's voice came through the earpiece, loud over the crackle of gunfire.
Yen.
We're pinned down on the east side. These bastards brought more men. Jennifer gripped the radio tightly. Hold your ground. Backup's on the way. She turned to Sam and Big Steve, motioning for them to move. We can't stay here. Get to Frankie's position. He's got the high ground. Go. Steve nodded, grabbing Sam by the collar and dragging him toward the nearest stack of lumber. Jennifer pivoted her chair, her eyes locked on the far end of the yard where Snakeneck stood, barking orders. Cut the head off the snake, she thought. Jennifer pulled the flare gun from her lap and stuffed it back into her bag, replacing it with a crowbar she'd brought from the diner. The cold weight of the metal steadied her. She'd fought wars before. She'd seen chaos like this before. This time, she wouldn't be caught off guard. From the treeline, the second wave arrived. Trucks and pickups thundered onto the property, their headlights blazing through the smoke. The sound of horns and shouts broke through the noise of the gunfire, and Snakeneck's men hesitated, turning toward the commotion. Hank's voice boomed from one of the trucks.
Now.
Carla's crew led the charge. The mechanics, armed with tools and tire irons, poured into the yard like an unstoppable wave. Frankie had repositioned to the upper levels of an old warehouse, his slingshot sending deadly ball bearings into the bikers from above. Big Steve and the truckers followed close behind, their sheer size and strength overwhelming anyone in their path. The road wolves' advantage, numbers and firepower, began to crumble. They hadn't expected a coordinated counterattack. Snakeneck turned toward the reinforcements, his expression twisting with fury. Stop them. Kill them all. Jennifer saw her moment. As Snakeneck barked his final orders, she pushed her wheelchair forward, maneuvering through the chaos like a ghost. One of Snakeneck's men spotted her and turned, a rifle raising in his hands. Jennifer didn't hesitate. She reached for a steel wrench strapped to her chair and hurled it, striking him square in the forehead. The man crumpled, the rifle clattering harmlessly to the ground. Jennifer pushed on, her chair rattling over the uneven terrain. Snakeneck's broad back loomed ahead as he stalked toward one of the trucks, trying to rally his men. Snakeneck. Jennifer's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He spun around, eyes narrowing when he saw her. Blood and sweat streaked his face, and his grip on his pistol tightened. You just don't know when to quit, do you? Jennifer's gaze didn't waver. That's the difference between you and me. I don't quit. Snakeneck laughed, the sound raw and jagged. You're in a wheelchair, lady. What do you think you're gonna do? Run me over? Jennifer didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a small object, a smoke grenade. She yanked the pin and hurled it at his feet. The grenade erupted with a hiss, spewing thick gray smoke that swallowed Snake Neck in seconds. He coughed and staggered, waving his arms uselessly. Jennifer moved fast, circling him like a predator stalking wounded prey. She could hear the clatter of the fight all around her, shouts, grunts, and the clanging of metal, but her focus was locked on him. Snake Neck stumbled blindly through the smoke. "Where are you, you bitch?" Jennifer's voice was low, calm, and cutting. "Right here." She swung the crowbar. The steel connected with the back of his knee, and Snake Neck collapsed with a howl, the pistol falling from his hand. Before he could recover, Jennifer wheeled closer, pressing the crowbar against his throat as she leaned forward. "You underestimated me," she said, her voice cold as steel. "You thought I was weak, but weakness doesn't survive." Snake Neck gasped, his eyes wide with panic. "You're dead, You're done," Jennifer snapped. "And whoever's paying you, they're next." From behind her, the chaos began to die down. The gunfire faded as Snake Neck's men realized the fight was lost. One by one, they dropped their weapons, hands raised in surrender as the defenders of Crossroads took control of the yard. Hank appeared out of the smoke, breathing heavily, his knuckles bloodied. "We've got him." The rest surrendered. Jennifer released Snake Neck, letting him collapse to the dirt. She looked up at Hank, her expression hard. "Make sure they don't go anywhere. Frankie's still up top. Get him down here. I want every phone, every radio, every piece of evidence in this place collected." Hank nodded, already barking orders to the others. Big Steve stomped over, a satisfied grin on his face. "We got their trucks. The crates are packed with enough weapons to start a war. What now?" Jennifer glanced down at Snake Neck, who was groaning in the dirt. "We exposed them. Call every reporter within 100 miles and show them what we found here." Sam approached, his face still pale but lit with something like awe. "We did it, didn't we? We won." Jennifer looked around the yard, at the defenders patching up wounds, at Carla's team cheering in exhausted triumph, and at the road wolves sitting cuffed on the ground. "We won this fight," Jennifer said quietly. "But this war's not over. Someone's still pulling the strings, and they'll come for us when they see what we've done." Hank nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready." Jennifer looked toward the distant road, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to break through the night. "Let them come," she murmured, the coin still warm in her palm. "They'll learn what happens when you push people too far." For the first time in years, Jennifer felt whole again, not because the fight was over, but because she was ready for what came next. Crossroads Diner would never be the same. It would be something stronger, a symbol of resilience, of defiance, and of people who refuse to be broken. The early morning light bathed the lumberyard in hues of gold and soft gray. Smoke still curled lazily from the charred oil drums and burnout trucks, and the distant hum of sirens signaled the arrival of police reinforcements, this time too late to matter. The chaos of the night had faded into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional groans of Snake Neck's men and the low murmur of voices among the defenders. Jennifer sat near the flatbed truck, her wheelchair streaked with dirt and ash, her hands resting loosely on her lap. Around her, Crossroads' makeshift army regrouped, bandaging wounds and catching their breath. The tension that had held them so tightly through the night finally loosened, replaced by something else, relief, pride, and disbelief that they'd survived. Big Steve trudged over, his massive form silhouetted against the rising sun. He dropped onto the hood of an abandoned SUV with a groan, the crowbar still clutched loosely in his hand. "Hell of a night," he muttered, his voice gravelly. Jennifer looked up at him, her face lined with exhaustion but calm. "We did what we had to," Steve grunted, wiping a streak of grime off his forehead. "We took Snake Neck's crew down, but you know this isn't the end, right?" Jennifer nodded, her gaze distant as she scanned the yard. Snake Neck sat slumped against the remains of a truck, his face bruised and bloody, hands cuffed tightly behind his back. Around him, his men sat in clusters, defeated and silent, their weapons confiscated and their swagger gone. Snake Neck caught Jennifer's eye and spat weakly at the ground, his voice hoarse but venomous. "You think you won?" he rasped. You have no idea what you're up against. Someone's gonna come for you, someone bigger. You're dead. All of you. Jennifer wheeled closer, stopping just out of reach. Her expression didn't flicker. Maybe someone will come, she replied quietly. But when they do, we'll be ready. You're done, Snake Neck. You're not getting out of this one. He sneered, but there was no power behind it, only hollow bluster. By the time Sheriff Cooper arrived, the scene had been locked down. Deputies poured into the lumberyard, weapons drawn, only to find a group of bruised but victorious defenders and a line of road wolves sitting with their heads bowed in surrender. The sheriff's SUV rolled to a stop near the entrance, dust swirling in its wake. Cooper stepped out, his face tight as he surveyed the wreckage. "What the hell happened here?" he barked, though his voice carried less authority than it had the night before. Hank stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the sheriff's path. "We stopped the wolves. Something you couldn't or wouldn't do." Cooper's face flushed. "This isn't how it's done. You don't take the law into your own hands." Jennifer rolled forward, her voice calm but cutting. "We didn't have a choice. You let this happen, Sheriff. You let them terrorize this town. If we hadn't fought back, they'd still be here." Cooper's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Behind him, two deputies opened the back of the flatbed truck, their expressions turning grim as they uncovered the crates of weapons. One of the younger deputies turned toward the sheriff, his voice wavering. "Sir, these are military grade. What the hell were they doing with these?" Jennifer's voice sliced through the growing tension. "Ask your contacts, Sheriff. Someone let them into this town and supplied them. Snake Neck didn't do this alone." Cooper's eyes darted toward the crates, then back to Jennifer. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," Carla muttered under her breath. Jennifer turned her chair, addressing the gathered crowd of defenders. Big Steve, Carla, Frankie, Sam, and the others who had risked everything to stand against the road wolves. "We need to make sure this story gets out. All of it. The weapons, the attack, the people pulling the strings behind it. This doesn't stay buried." Hank nodded. "I'll make some calls." Truckers talk. Word'll spread faster than a wildfire. Big Steve grinned. "And I know a couple reporters who'd love a story like this. Snake Neck and his crew be famous for all the wrong reasons." Cooper's face paled, his confidence crumbling as he realized how quickly he was losing control of the narrative. Jennifer fixed him with a pointed stare. "The truth's coming out, Sheriff. Either you're part of the solution, or you're part of the problem." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and stomped toward his SUV, barking orders at his deputies to process the scene. Hours later, as the sun climbed higher, the defenders began to disperse. Frankie packed up his scouting gear, offering Jennifer a rare smile. "You did good," he said quietly. "Not many people could have pulled this off." Jennifer inclined her head. "You were the eyes out there. Couldn't have done it without you." Carla clapped Jennifer on the shoulder as she passed, a tired grin on her face. "The diner's gonna need a hell of a lot of repairs, but we'll get it done. You're tougher than you look, Jen. Stick around and you'll see how tough I can be," Jennifer replied with a faint smile. Sam lingered nearby, his chain still dangling loosely in his hand. He shuffled his feet awkwardly before speaking. I didn't think I could do it. Any of it." Jennifer looked up at him, her voice soft but firm. "You showed up when it counted. That's what matters." Sam nodded, his chest swelling with pride.
Thanks, Yen.
By the time Jennifer returned to the diner later that afternoon, the crossroads sign was still flickering weakly against the pale blue sky. The building stood battered and broken, windows shattered, walls scorched, but it was still standing. Hank leaned against the hood of his truck, watching her wheel closer. "You're not gonna let this place close down, are you?" Jennifer shook her head. "Not a chance." Hank smirked. "Figured as much. Word's already spreading, you know. People are hearing what we did here. Truckers, mechanics, farmers, folks are talking. You've got a hell of a reputation now." Jennifer looked up at the diner, her gaze thoughtful. "It's not about reputation, Hank. It's about what's right. This place stood because we stood together. That's the real story." Hank grunted his agreement. "You're damn right." Jennifer rolled to the edge of the lot, her hands resting lightly on the armrests of her chair as she looked out over the empty road. The fight wasn't over, not yet. Whoever had sent the road wolves would come looking for answers, for revenge. But they'd find Crossroads Diner waiting for them, stronger than before. Jennifer reached into her pocket and pulled out the polished coin, its surface catching the afternoon light. It was no longer just a symbol of her past. It was a reminder of what she could still fight for, of who she could still be. "They thought they could break us," she murmured, her voice carrying softly on the breeze. "But they only made us stronger." And as the sun hung high over Crossroads Diner, the flickering neon sign steadied, glowing bright against the sky. The end.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.